Hi everyone, welcome to another G News update. Well, we're here in bright sunlight at the Ofanaki Reserve, and behind me is a beautiful wildlife area where boaties come and park up their launches and yachts sometimes to get out of the shelter. So we're one bay round from Matiatia, where the ferry comes in, and this is a beautiful, quiet area. In fact, there's a gentleman walking along behind the camera here, carrying his fishing pole on his way to go fishing this morning. I'll just pan the camera around so you can just see a little bit more of the bay. There's the entrance to the bay out there, and there's a gentleman walking around over this way now. He's coming any minute. You'll be able to see him. He'll probably just walk past. There he goes, fisherman. He just gave us a wave, and he's on his way for a bit of fishing off the shore. So it's quite a beautiful morning this morning, and I had to traverse this little freshwater stream here that runs into the ocean to get to this spot, just so that I could sit with bright sunshine in my face and try and talk to you about political news again this morning. So let's just start with Christopher Luxon and his comment that made a headline yesterday on the Tiles, where he said that Benjamin Netanyahu had lost the plot, and really this was a kind of a reaction, I think, to the enormous amount of public pressure that had come on to the government to actually do something and to act and take some action on an unfolding genocide in Gaza. We'd seen Anthony Albanese come over to New Zealand and meet with Christopher Luxon, and one of those agenda items was the situation in Gaza. And shortly after that, we saw Australia publicly announce their commitment to taking some action and recognising the state of Palestine via the PLO, that they would deal with them in the West Bank. And so they joined Canada and France and the UK in shifting their position. And so now there were 146 nations, 146 nations who are member states of the United Nations, who had taken some kind of formal action in the face of a genocide where millions of people are in an open-air prison and being starved. But in the meantime, the national government and Winston Peters and Davey Boy Seymour and all the people in the ACT Party were unable to do anything about this. You know, people were starving and being shot while they were queuing for food, and even that wasn't enough for these guys to actually make a quick decision. So instead, they basically formed the view that these people, particularly the children, may as well starve until September, until they get around to having a bit of a chat in a cabinet meeting about what New Zealand should do. And New Zealand has now become an embarrassment, an absolute laggard, an isolated leper on the world stage when it comes to human rights. So we're basically just sitting around on our hands, and this terrible context is bigger than the matters of politeness and form in our parliament. And so Chloe Swarbrick had brought a members' bill to Parliament and challenged the National Party MPs to actually cross the floor. Now, this is something that Christopher Luxon had always said before an election, that it was really important to be able to walk across the floor and talk in a civil way with people who are opposed to your way of thinking, to bring this kind of civility to our discourse. And Chloe Swarbrick was just saying, get a spine, in the same way that Judith Collins would come out and say something like, you're gutless, you know, or John Key would come out and say, get some guts. And there'd been quite a lot of history of these people themselves using the word spineless in Parliament, and yet none of them really got up there and said, look, spineless is okay. Now, yesterday we saw Jerry double down on his decision, which was controversial because the standing orders and precedent basically said 24 hours and that's the end of the matter. If somebody is sent out, you start again. But Jerry was holding on to this need for an apology. He'd extended things to the end of the week without precedent. And then yesterday, after he was examined for about 20 minutes by members of the opposition who were galvanized and working together in a smooth, coordinated, united machine full of kotahitanga, we basically just saw Jerry kind of like lose it and just say, look, I was offended personally. I, Jerry Brownlee, took offence, and so I'm now awarding some kind of punishment that causes everybody in Parliament to question, his suitability. And I think on G News we did about a poll, and there was about a 500 comment reaction to whether Jerry needs to go because he's not fit as a speaker, and he's undermining the privilege really that he's got in that speaker's role by consistently overstepping and overreaching and being punitive against the left wing, particularly minority left wing parties that are represented by females. So he's coming down kind of in what looks like to many people a very prejudiced, one-sided, biased manner, which is not fitting for a speaker who needs to be neutral. And he failed that test yesterday. He had the opportunity to reflect, but I think New Zealand underlined that, Jerry, you failed and you need to go. You're not up to it. And I'm sorry if you don't agree, but this is the public, this is democracy, and, it's been a mistake. You can't hear things, you rule inconsistently, you can't remember people's names. So when it comes to confidence in Parliament, look at yourself here, Jerry, and what you've done. So anyway, his actions yesterday served to just galvanise everybody across the nation about this outrage that the government is sitting on its hands, and Christopher Luxon, who had been accused by his own party president of not having any visible humanity, suddenly gets out on the tiles under enormous leadership pressure and says, look, my personal view is that Netanyahu has basically lost the plot. But I can't speak for the National Party because we don't have that kind of spine. We don't have that kind of unity. We don't have a uniform position. And we certainly can't speak for New Zealand First, and we certainly cannot speak for Davey Boy and the ACT Party. So there's no government view, there's no government functionality here. It's all dysfunctional. And I think New Zealanders see that. So after these headlines were blurted around, some people said, oh, well, I'm glad that Christopher Luxon has actually expressed a view at last, because he'd been far too fearful and timid to actually even do that at this week's post-cabinet press conference. He refused to actually share with the press gallery what his personal view was. So it was only the pressure that was applied through the humanitarian leadership of Chloe Swarbrick being able to take one for humanity, really, and being kicked out over something that was pretty mild in the context of war crimes, that we actually saw things move, and the popular pressure was getting to Christopher Luxon, whose leadership has been questioned in headlines now for at least the last couple of weeks, very strongly, like who can replace him. So there was all of that, and that was sort of the topic of the country yesterday. Quite quickly, there needed to be some kind of distraction. There needed to be something thrown into the mix. Well, that came along in the form of two things. One was the way in which the Royal Commission of Inquiry into COVID, which had been conducted very formally and properly in the first phase, had this kind of like second phase that was more of a political stunt, really, added on by minor parties who demanded this as part of the coalition agreement. So this is again MMP demanding that there's kind of more of a sort of a kangaroo court, a sort of a lynch mob revenge second phase to the COVID inquiry. Now, what we saw is that with Royal Commissions, there's a convention, and this means that when people are asked to cooperate with the Royal Commission of Inquiry, no matter what the topic is, they're often just asked to kind of provide some information, and often that's in private or it can be in public. But in cases where someone's been heavily abused, say for example, death threats have been made publicly, or if you got in a room with people who are very, very angry and making noises about shooting people or killing people or threatening to point a gun or something like that at somebody, like a former Prime Minister, then the Royal Commission themselves would say, look, we don't want to do that. There's no convention, no need to do that. So to tell a different story from this convention and make a headline out of it as if there was some kind of compulsion to appear publicly would be a media beat-up. That would be kind of thing you might see at News Talk ZB if they were very partisan and part of a sort of a lynch mob mentality, fostering abuse and misogyny and all those kind of things. So was the organisation chaired by Stephen Joyce participating in this? Was the organisation with Paul Henry Hope on the board participating in this kind of abusive kind of behaviour, try and drum up a sort of a kangaroo lynch mob court and demanding that the victims of abuse be present, even when all the information that they needed had been provided? So that was a good question this morning. And it kind of distracted people away from millions of people being starved to death and the fact that Christopher Luxon, Winston Peters and Davey Boy weren't doing anything about things. It's notable that Winston Peters himself objected yesterday to Jerry Brownlee's decision to get in the way because Jerry was personally offended that it must have struck the truth somewhere inside him that his party, the National Party, had sat on its hands and done nothing about Gaza, had actually just letting these people starve, and he was offended at the idea that they needed to get a spy, and it really got to him. And so he was taking it personally and losing his objectivity, in my opinion. And there was Winston, after the vote had been taken, stepping up too late to say, look, he didn't agree with Jerry, that this was a place where there should be more robust debate, where we should be able to talk, where manners and form and good form have gone crazy, basically, and taken over the whole purpose of the place. And Chloe herself had actually talked about, what is the purpose of all of this if you just can't get on and do the thing that is true? You know, the government hasn't acted on a war crime, on a genocide that's unfolding, starving people night after night, week after week. And what are we doing? Where's the action? There's no action. So I've put up a couple of pieces of information on my page today. I recommend, if you're not doing anything on Saturday, go along and be human, show up and, speak up for these children that are being starved to death. Speak up for people who are starving, who go along and are being sniper-fired in the back by the IDF. Stand for something. I mean, if you're not going to do this now, then, go on the record as like, I don't care or something. But so those dynamics were playing out, and we basically saw Christopher Hipkins fronting the media again for a second time this week. He appeared on Radio New Zealand. He talked to Ingrid Hipkiss, and what did Ingrid have to say? Well, Ingrid was very uptight about the public confidence that you needed to break the conventions of all royal commissions here. Seemed to be the premise that Ingrid was spouting, that public confidence by some kind of circus show in front of a lynch mob of people that are abusive was more important than the information that had already been requested and given by Chris Hipkins. So we were being asked to believe that the information and the conclusions and the processes that were conventions for royal commissions were not any longer the point. The point was appear before a lynch mob of violent, disrespectful people and who have a grudge against you, or it all goes out the window. We don't care about the information. Now, Chippy Christopher Hipkins, the next Prime Minister, had provided 25 pages of information to the Commission. He had responded to every single question that they had. He's available all the time to answer any questions. And Grant Illingworth couldn't be bothered to show up to interview Chris Hipkins when he made himself available. Now, Grant Illingworth is a KC who's leading this kangaroo court second phase of this Royal Commission of Inquiry. And in the end, he wanted to ask the same questions again, despite the fact that the Commission had basically already asked those questions and got fulsome answers. Chippy had gone along and been prepared to talk for 2 hours to the Commission. He'd made himself fully available, and they couldn't actually ask him anything more. After an hour, they'd run out of questions, and they signed it off saying, well, we don't need to do anything more with you. We're not going to ask you the same questions again. But there was a need politically from Winston Peters and from Judith Collins and a few others to suggest, Chris Bishop was another one, that this was disgusting and disgraceful. It wasn't about the information. That, abused people and people that had already, fulfilled all of their obligations to the Royal Commission needed to perform like a circus seal and appear before their abusers in a theatrical game of abuse, because abuse is really important. So we needed to abuse these people again. So there's a lot of people out there that are very angry and abusive. They know who they are. They're the ones that wrote in chalk that death threats outside Parliament, the ones that Davy Boy and Winston and co kind of endorsed and got beside. So the death threat thing from New Zealand First is a big deal. Chris Hipkins also said that, look, nobody colluded here. Nobody was talking to each other. It's up to Dame Jacinda Ardern, to speak for herself when it comes to why she didn't appear here in front of a kangaroo court of abusers. But the defence that had been put forward by people that work for Jacinda and for some of the others was that they'd already provided all the information, and that the abuse thing isn't something that a Royal Commission does. And I think Grant Illingworth had to agree that we just don't want to abuse people that have been victims of abuse by putting them into some kind of kangaroo court. So there was a big beat up. And it wasn't ironic that Judith Collins, who had prayed in the chapel before the 2020 election, who had walked down Ponsonby Road and met people in a staged way who were her fans and tried to fool the public that these were authentic members of the public that just happened to bump into her, who had been a star of Dirty Politics, and Mrs. Oravida, who had pretty much almost risked the whole country's airlines in and out of Auckland, with the gas supply, the whole swamp Kari thing, and who had recently lost a satellite as the Minister of Space, but kind of, whether it was a coincidence or not, suddenly got vertigo and was unable to answer questions. Poor thing, our sympathy. She was on the attack, saying it was just bloody awful. It was just gutless, disgraceful that these former politicians hadn't subjected themselves to this kangaroo court, and instead they'd been cooperating fully with the Royal Commission of Inquiry. Second phase, they provided all the information and continued to cooperate. But that wasn't good enough. It was, this was kind of News Talk ZB, New Zealand Herald, Stephen Joyce time. So, politics. So nobody can believe anything Judah had to say. And it's just kind of dirty politics and horrible stuff. And in the meantime, the attention of the nation goes away from the starving children, and on to all of this game playing by the National Party. So there are a couple of other topics. One of them was that Kieran McAnulty appeared beside Paul Goldsmith this morning on TVNZ Breakfast. They had that panel on Thursdays. And what happened? Well, Kieran slayed Goldsmith totally, because basically Goldsmith was saying that in the first year of learning English, we need to take out 6 words from a book that are in Te Reo, and that will be less confusing. When the word cafe, that's fine. The word sushi, well, no, that's not a problem. Words from any other country, they're not going to be pulled out of these books. But Te Reo, which is an indigenous word, kind of like Gaelic in Ireland, which is that they're very proud of. We're not proud of that. And Kieran made the point that there was no reason to take these words out. Nothing, no evidence that stacked up. This is basically a bad move. And in the context of all the other moves, like the Treaty Principles Bill, the Regulatory Standards Bill, the Marine and Area Coastal Act, and the recent moves that Paul Goldsmith's making, are now taking words out of books that just happen to be the indigenous official language of the country, is wrong and an overreach, and it's political, and that they shouldn't be playing these kind of race card politics with education. And he was quite right. He made a lot of sense. And Goldsmith started saying, well, everybody's saying this, and all you people out there trying to make out there's something big going on here. And Kieran just slaughtered him and said, look, what you're doing is nobody's saying that. Nobody's saying that at all. In fact, you are the people who are overreaching here and taking these 6 words. The problem with people leaving school and not being able to read and write, that's been around for decades. It's got nothing to do with a few words, 6 words in a book. So Goldsmith was just basically murdered by the whole argument that was put forward, and just made to look like a blithering idiot by Kieran, who was magnificent, really. I think we can all agree. Straight to the point. He's kind of our kind of guy. So that went down. Now, there was also another topic I want to talk about, and that is that one of the people working as an advisor with Grant Robertson wrote an article this morning in the Herald, which detailed the way that Treasury's tax to GDP ratios had consistently changed every time there was a new forecast. Tax to revenue went down, 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 down. And that kind of really just highlighted the fact that the tax take was falling away, and Treasury couldn't see it. Every forecast was wrong, and they had to make it less each time. So every 3 months, Treasury corrected itself, and the point was made by Tony Moore, that's the guy's name. He basically said, look, it wasn't actually until October 2022 that Treasury stopped advising that we should have some more stimulus. So that's quite late in the piece, isn't it? 2022. And Treasury were not getting their forecasts right multiple times. And there's a graph there. I'll show it, this graph here. And you can see all of those colored lines are the progressive changes from an optimistic outlook to a bit less, to a bit less, to a bit less. There's about 5 or 6 of these colored lines as Treasury change from B-food to pre-food to B-food to high food over the last few years, and the tax take is going down. And so the reason I mention all this is that there's been a great religious fervour over at News Talk ZB, at the New Zealand Herald, and even in the Post, to say that basically if Treasury says that we spent more money in COVID than we should have, and it makes some kind of loose comparisons with other nations who are advanced economies, then that's the gospel truth. But as you can see, Treasury doesn't actually have a handle on what's happening, and its forecasts are pretty bad. And last night I contributed to interviewing Craig Rennie on his podcast, Locked Out, which is now on my page. You can find the link to that podcast. And we talked for about 40 minutes about why the long-term Treasury Insights briefing is basically couldn't be more wrong. It's basically trying to say that one of the findings there is that fiscal policy, which is what Nicola Willis and Grant Robertson deal with, our tax and our spending and our investment and everything, that needs to play no part in future crises, and basically monetary policy, which is a very blunt instrument, is the way to go. And so we talk through all of these kind of wrongful takes and errors in this Treasury paper that is venerated and regarded as the gospel truth on the right wing of politics. It doesn't vindicate anything. It basically says we basically labelled a whole lot of things COVID, like jobs for nature. We labelled shovel-ready projects as COVID because we were trying to save jobs and keep the economy going in a counter-cyclical way. And nobody's sophisticated really enough on the right wing to have a proper discussion about this. And as soon as you start to get a little bit pointy-headed about things, well, people turn off. But there it is. We're just basically talking about the way in which the right wing is once again misinformed and believing things that just simply aren't true. So there's probably a couple of other things that I want to talk about. One of them is thank you very much for your ongoing support. We're going a little bit backwards at G News at the moment, but Your support is helping us a great deal to just sort of hold things together, even though we're going backwards. And Vicky is working pretty hard on trying to find something, innovative or something to do, a job to make ends meet. So I don't anticipate this to go on for too long. But anyway, thank you very much from both of us. And we're both going to be participating on Saturday in the Auckland Day of Solidarity for the Palestinian people who are being starved to death, whose human rights have been taken away, who are living in an open-air prison, who are being shot when they try and survive and eat food by the IDF. And we think that that's the least that we can do, and we're probably a bit late. We should have done more. And this government needs to do something. Jerry needs to be gone. Just resign, Jerry. Just step down. Jerry's got to go. He's just not up to the job. Christopher Luxon, you're not a leader. You're sitting on your hands. You're letting them starve till September along with Winston Peters and Davey Boy Seymour. That's wrong. Judith Collins, how dare you? How dare you, of all people, take the high horse after all of your history? And Dame Jacinda Ardern, you did a great job, a fantastic job, and I recommend everybody go and see her film and documentary about the masterclass in looking after 20,000 lives, people who are still alive today, who would be dead if you listen to people like the National Party, these people that are in Treasury right now writing these really wrong reports, News Talk ZB and all the moaning and groaning, far-right, libertarian, neoliberal disc jockeys that they get in there with their big platform and their great big microphones to try and mess with the middle classes, to try and make us all suffer. We are the majority. We are the middle classes. We're the people of New Zealand. Vote them out, New Zealand. Vote them out hard. Come on now. This is our country. Let's take this whole back. Winston Peters, over. No more of the hate. No more of the kangaroo courts. No more of your rubbish about the word Aotearoa. Get with the program, man, or get out of politics. That's all I have to say today. Hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.